Bible. I guess I probably need my Bible out. I'm going to go ahead and get that real quick. I got my notes out. So this is the 7th week of our class on the Freedom series, as it is entitled. How to handle freedom. Freedom is a dangerous thing, can be, if we don't handle it correctly, if we don't, think about the freedom that we have, because freedom is a very, very strong theme throughout Scripture. From the very beginning, it's about man's story of being free and then being put in chains and sin and then the coming out of those chains and being free. That's a very quick analogy of it, but that's kind of what happened, and that's what we're looking at. So we're going to go to 2 Timothy 2. That's going to be our first section that we're going to start looking at. But I wanted to tell you, I forgot the conclusion of my lesson this morning. I was so bummed when I got home and realized that I'd forgot my conclusion. So I'll share that with you now, because it's a funny story. I knew the lesson was going to be kind of heavy, so I wanted something to kind of, lift it up a little bit, but I had to put it on the back of my paper, and then I forgot to turn the paper over. So I missed it. But when our kids were little, Justin was a football player, and a whole lot of the kids that he went to school with were cheerleaders. So he'd get to know them, and he'd get to know, everybody there. And we were, was this a cheerleading competition, or was it during a game? It was during a game that Brooke Scudder, the daughter of the head coach, was doing a cheer. And the name of the team was Raiders. So they're all, give me an R. There was a girl, go, give me an R. You kind of are, so. But you got to go through me or we get in trouble. Yeah, so the first girl, give me an R, everybody yelled R. Give me an A, everybody yelled A. The next girl said, give me a, she had to look at her shirt. I, give me an I. So the point of that was going to be, we need to be cheerleaders for each other rather than throwing stones at each other, right? That was the point. That let's get behind you. You can see those lessons in little kids cheering one another. They don't even know what they're cheering for, but they're jumping up and down and they're excited. And that, to me, that's kind of how we got to be with each other. We need to be cheerleaders, supporters, encourage one another, lift everybody up. So there's your closure from the lesson this morning. My apologies. So let's go to 2 Timothy. Let's get down into here. And I want to go to chapter 2. Let's start down here at verse 1, 2 Timothy 2, 1 through 4. You therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. Which that's an interesting concept, strong in the grace. What is strong in the grace? Let's talk about that at some point. The things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men also who will be able to teach others. Suffer hardship with me as a good soldier of Christ. So Paul is talking to Timothy about responsibilities, about his job, about things that he's got to be doing. There's going to be suffering involved. If you're a soldier in the military, chances are, especially if you're in, as verse 4 says, active service, and I want to talk about that. When you're in active service, you're going to struggle. You're going to bleed. There's going to be some times it's going to be very difficult. You're out in the field and you're up all day and all night and all day, and you're just filled with exhaustion. That's what serving Christ is going to be like sometimes. It's going to feel that way. It's going to feel like you've been in a war zone. It's going to feel like you got shrapnel all over from bombs going off. That's what it can feel like. We don't want that. So we try to apply the Word of God to our lives to reduce the damage, because life is going to be hard enough as it is. So suffer hardship with me as a good soldier of Christ. No soldier in active service does what? Entangles himself in the affairs of everyday life. So, here's the reason, so that he may please the one who enlisted him. Because when you join something, when you stand up, and there's several of us in here that have stood on the footprints and raised our right hand and taken an oath. And so what I want to do tonight, I've given microphones to Fred and to Jim. These are both military veterans. Jim served in Vietnam in 67. Jim, is that right? 69 and 70. Not a good time in Vietnam in 1969. I remember 69. I was 12 years old. And Dr. King had just gotten killed. And riots all over. People were dying. Buildings were being burned. Families being destroyed. Besides all the young men that we were losing in Vietnam, right? It was a war-torn time. And that was kind of the framework for me and Kathy as we grew up as kids, was watching all of these events unfold. Old enough to understand it, old enough to see what was going on, but too young to be able to do anything about it, right? So that's kind of where we find ourselves. Sometimes we're in the kingdom and things are going on and we see all this trouble and we gravitate away from that. We don't want to be where there's constant problems and friction. Who would? Do we want to bring people in here? We're out here trying to work in this community. Do we want to be bringing people in here only for them to get in here and for us to be fighting? We can't be having that. That's no effective way to communicate the gospel. We will not be able to communicate the gospel if we live like that. So we have to have this mindset. And so I've asked Jim and Fred, I wanted Jim to talk to us a little bit about a soldier's responsibility. He was in Vietnam in combat areas. Talk to us, Jim, about what your job was and what your responsibility was.
I guess my job, I was a platoon leader, and our job was search and destroy, is basically keep the NVA and Viet Cong from bringing arms and supplies across the An Lo Valley area. That's where we were.
Okay.
And that was we did search and destroy missions during the daytime and set up ambushes at night to prevent that.
So talk to me about the mental state of the soldiers there. What kind of a space in their mind did they have to have in order to do that? Because that sounds very dangerous, what you're describing.
Number one, survive.
Okay, that's fair.
I guess number two, help everybody else that was around them survive.
Okay.
And
so they were fighting for who?
they were fighting for each other for the most part.
Absolutely.
At that point in time, we'd already decided we wasn't going to win the war, so they were
Fighting to
basically
stay
fighting
alive.
for each other.
Wow. Anybody see any connection to the church in that? Is there a connection anywhere in that? We have to have you think they had to be mentally tough to be able to deal with that? Yeah. If they didn't, they probably wouldn't survive it, right? Brethren, if we're not strong mentally in our approach to Christ and the kingdom, if we don't see ourselves as soldiers out here performing a function for our commander, for the one who enlisted us, which is who? Who enlisted us in this army? Jesus Christ. Steve?
Yeah, but there's a deep contrast between a soldier and somebody at home. Now, you example people who are fighting and infighting amongst the societal norm.
Right.
But when people operate within a peacetime environment and they have little to do and they have so much time on their hands, how much trouble do they get into?
Mm-hmm.
So now you contrast that individual with what Paul just directed. He's saying, be like an active soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the active soldier operating in Vietnam on a day-to-day basis, operating in a 24/7, high-strung, high-intensity, mental acuity, exhausting, draining
Right.
And so they're not going to contribute. And so you have somebody in the church who is heavily engaged and active versus maybe somebody who has way too much time on their hands and they're not engaged.
Yeah, excellent point.
That's where you have infighting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can remember part of my job when I was stationed overseas was to go and get the guys that would come in from Kaneohe Air Base, because they'd been out at sea for 6 months or 9 months. They come in, they get a big wad of cash in their hands, and they go downtown and get in trouble. Perfect illustration of that. They're no longer any use to their unit now, because now he's got to go through the, what's that thing called, Fred, that we all stood and made our promise to in front of the steps? The oath? What's that called? The military term that we lived under while we were in the military. The Uniform Code of Military Justice, right? The UCMJ. That's what we lived under, right? That was our, so you're no longer, that UCMJ takes care of those guys, right? You get in trouble, you go, there's a tribunal many times, depending on the seriousness of it, but you'll definitely get some office hours typically if you do something like that. You're going to be standing in front of your commanding officer. Brethren, that's exactly what's going to happen to us. We're going to stand in front of our commanding officer one of these days, the one who enlisted us, our general, our leader. And we're going to have to account for our behavior in the field, out here in combat. I mean, we almost have to have this military mindset. I'm sure that's why the Spirit gave us this lesson, because everybody knows a military. From the time you're a little kid, you're familiar with the military, right? That's a concept that we learned very early. So I want to get back to Jim's points now. So these soldiers, they depend on each other. That's part of our responsibility as brethren. The freedom that we've been given in Christ, some responsibility comes with that freedom. And if we're going to have that kind of responsibility, we need to understand what it is. And that is simply, Jim said, I asked the question, what are they fighting for? Who are those guys over there fighting? Number one job in the jungle was to survive. Secondly, when you fight, who are you fighting for? You're not fighting for the flag. You know, you're not fighting for the country. You're fighting for John and David that's right next to you in the hole. That's who you're fighting for. And you take pictures to remind you of why you're there. That is to protect my family, protect my nation. But the guys next to you are the ones you're fighting for. It's exactly how we need to be. We need to have that mindset if one of us goes down or they get hit or they get shot, sin hits them, let's go through the fire and let's grab them and let's pull them back like they do in the battlefield. I'm sure Jim's seen some men die trying to save other men's lives. It happens. And if we die in the process of serving the King, so be it, right? That's how we have to look at it. That's how serious, to me, that we have to look at this thing. So I've asked Fred, too, to give us an idea of leadership. So Fred is retired, how many years?
20 good years, 28 total.
28 total. 20 good years, that's funny. I'd say you had 28 good years. But talk to us about leadership and what your role was.
The general principle that and you have to think about this from the Air Force standpoint. In the Air Force, the officers typically do not lead men into battle. So it's a different type of military than what you see with the Army or the Marines or even the Navy. The officers usually are the ones that go into battle with airplanes or machinery, and the enlisted stay back and support. So I come from a different vantage point. What leadership is, in the sense of not leading men into battle, but leading men outside of that realm. My basic principle of leadership that I took to heart was the leader is supposed to set the example. They're supposed to know the rules, and they're supposed to set the example. And what I mean by that is the men, my first chance at leadership, when the men that I led who were going through basic training, they had to go through obstacle courses and assault courses and all these things, and I participated with them when I did that. And the reason is because I wanted them to see me going through and getting in the dirt and getting muddy and getting filthy and sweaty and suffering like they did. So that way, that way their esprit de corps, if you want to call it, or whatever, would be of a person that they saw who did it themselves. And I think the worst kind of leader is the leader that you bring in to lead a group of people who's never done that job. And that's one of the examples of, the worst type of example of a leader is a leader who knows the rules but doesn't follow himself. And the best example is a leader like Tom Holman, who's our, I don't even know what he is, the DHS secretary, I guess. Homeland Security Secretary. Anyway, he spent his whole entire career from the age of 20 to he's over, I guess he's in his 60s now, maybe in his 70s. His entire career doing law enforcement, going to Border Patrol and starting from the lowest position, and now he's at the highest position with thousands of people under him. And what makes him a good leader is because anybody in that organization knows that he's done all the jobs.
Right. Right.
So he's the perfect example of what a leader should be. And I think that's one of the reasons why, when we look at elders, why a person like myself shouldn't be an elder, because I didn't raise children. And so the reason being is because I haven't gone through that mold or that furnace,
Right.
so to speak,
Right.
because I haven't fought that fire. And that's one of the reasons when you read the description of elders and for men who lead, you see they're apt to teach. They're given to hospitality. They're the rulers of a household of children who follow how they've lived up to the standard. So they've gone through the gauntlet and they've survived it, and because of that experience level. And a keynote to leadership too, that I've during my career as a leader, and I remember the biggest group I ever led was a group of 3 crewmen and myself, plus an airplane and maybe some passengers and whatever was all in that airplane. So it was a very small team unit. And the worst example of leadership that I ever came across was I'm out in the field with an aircraft doing a mission, and I'm calling back to my leadership to get permission to do something. And my leadership, they said I was asking for a waiver. And if anybody understands what a waiver process is, everybody has rule books, and everybody understands what the rules are. And leaders can repeat the rules back to somebody and say, I've done my job. But a true leader, when they're confronted with a situation where the rule book sets up standards, but that specific situation that person's dealing with requires judgment. And my leadership, when I asked for a waiver to do this thing that I needed to do to get this aircraft home and continue on the mission, that person quoted me what the rule book said. And I said, sir, I understand what the rule book said because I've already read the rule book. That's why I'm asking you personally for a waiver to complete the mission. Instead of giving me an answer, he ended up getting ruled by committee, and he went and asked about 20 people, and they had to have a conference call. And by the time this has all happened, the crisis or whatever had gone beyond. So it was, and so that I can hire somebody, I could hire the lowest person to read me a rule book and tell me what to do, what the rule book says. But it takes a leader to look at a situation, and this is where I think where God has shown us how beautiful his leadership is with us, because he looks at the situation. He knows what the rule book says. He knows what justice is, but what does he grant us? He grants us mercy, which is a beautiful thing, and that's what true leadership shows. Not only do they understand the rules, not only have they lived the life themselves, not only do they set the example, but they also have grace and mercy to where when someone breaks a rule, they can forgive and grow by that and show a little love. And so I think to me, that's what leadership is.
That's excellent. And I don't know what was jumping in your minds while Fred was telling us that, but I thought of Jesus going through the gauntlet. He was the one in the dirt and the mud with us, right? He was the one showing us by example. We can't ever say, boy, Jesus never experienced this. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He experienced life. And life today is not that different than life 10,000 years ago, other than the fact of the way that we live and the way that we dress. We grow up, we get married, we have kids, we raise our family, we have work. Those things have never changed since the garden. They never will change, right? Those are the things that we go through. But when you see a leader like Christ that's willing not to just die, scriptures teach us, but die that death for us is amazing. And so when you see this language of a military, it helps us wrap our minds because we see the military, we're familiar with that, we're in the military, many of us, and we understand all of that, and then to see that kind of a leader doing that kind of a job is how we are supposed to relate to one another.
I forgot to mention the main point. The main point was, if you look at Cornelius, Cornelius was a centurion, and by definition, as a person who ruled 100 soldiers. That was the first Gentile Christian, was a military commander. And why was he chosen? You look at his example. He was a devout man, which means he lived by example. He feared God with all his house. So even the people in his own family followed what he did. And he gave much alms. In other words, he put it into action. He put his money where his mouth was. And then it says that the people, and they prayed to God always. And you see that this group of people, he was able to get a group of people to his house who trusted him, and the gospel was preached to them first as Gentiles, and they were all baptized for the remission of their sins because of this man in a leadership position in the military.
I'd never thought about that. I'd never dawned on me that a military commander was the first Gentile convert that we've got. That's great. Thank you for that. Fred's going to be teaching a class. When's your class coming up here? July. Third quarter, he's going to be teaching up here, so that'll be awesome. Looking forward to that. Anybody got any comments on any of that? Okay, let's go to 2 Kings. I know that's kind of a big shift, but let's go to 2 Kings, chapter 7. Second Kings chapter 7. And this is really the main point. The material that we've covered up to this point, the military stuff, was just stuff that was going through my mind when I was thinking about the responsibility that we have as Christians when we take the oath. What is the oath that the Christian takes? What kind of an oath do we take to Christ? When we enroll as a soldier in the army of Christ, what kind of an oath do we take? A living sacrifice, Susan? That's it. What did Jesus do when he, in order for him to leave heaven and to come here, what did he have to do? I mean, I don't know if he could have done the job without this. He had to empty himself. When you become a soldier, what happens to your former life? I know when I got home from boot camp, I had people go, "What? Wow, yeah." I had people go, "Yeah, you're different." I got that a lot. You're different. Well, yeah, I mean, how can you not be? That is going to change a person. This ought to change us. Being in here, we're not as focused on the world here. When I come here, I'm looking for my retreat from the world so I can be surrounded with people of God. People that are going to speak right, and they're going to speak truth, and they're going to be kind, and they're going to be supportive. I go out into the workforce, it's not always like that. We don't want that here. Here can't exist in the kingdom. 2 Kings chapter 7. Let's go down and look at verses 3 down through probably around verse 9. Now there were 4 leprous men at the entrance of the gate. And I know what I wanted to do. Jesse, give us the background here. What's going on here? Elisha has just given them a prophecy about future food prices and things that are going to go on, which sounded crazy, most likely, to the people then. But what's happening right now here?
They're about to come under siege by the Syrians, and Elisha is trying to encourage them that don't worry, God's not giving up on you. Food's coming. The siege, right? Because siege is every city's worried about a siege,
Sure.
right? And the promise of food during a siege is
That's tough.
that's tough.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out how are we going to.
So what's the future looking like right now for these guys?
Well, if they run out of food, especially lepers, they'd be the first to probably be
Right.
left off.
Yeah.
Because
They're out.
outside the city,
Yeah.
outside the camp, right? They may have been able to be brought into the city walls, but very close to the exterior. So the first ones to go.
So with that in mind, with those thoughts in mind, let's read this. So these 4 leprous men are at the entrance of the gate. They say to one another, "Why do we sit here until we die? If we say we will enter the city, then the famine is in the city and we will die there. If we sit here, we'll die also. Now therefore, let us go over to the camp of the Arameans. If they spare us, we will live." Yeah, this is funny. "If they kill us, we will die." I chuckled at that a couple times. Read that, like, yeah, well, you got a good point there, Larry. If they kill you, yeah, you're going to be dead. So that's kind of where they're at. And so here's what they come up with. They arose at twilight to go to the camp of the Arameans, and when they came to the outskirts of the camp, behold, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the army of the Arameans to hear a sound of chariots and a sound of horses, even the sound of a great army, so that they said to one another, "Behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to come upon us." Therefore they arose and fled in the twilight, left their tents, their horses, their donkeys, and the camp just as it was, and fled for their life. They were getting out of Dodge. They were getting off the sinking ship, at least they thought. And when these lepers came to the outskirts of the camp, they entered one tent, ate and drank, and carried from there silver and gold and clothes, and went and hid them. Woo, we're having a party this weekend, y'all. Come over to my tent. I got stuff. They went and hid them, and they returned and entered another tent and carried from there also and went and hid them. They're just making hay out here, man. They're living high. Then something happened. What happened? Somebody had a conscience. Somebody started thinking, wait a minute, we got people back home that need to know this. And they said to one another, "We are not doing right. This day is a day of good news, but we are keeping silent. If we wait until morning light, punishment will overtake us. Now therefore come, let us go and tell the king." And of course the king thought, that's a trap, because that's military commander. It's a trap. They're trying to lure us out so they can attack us. Now this was God working to help them out. God was at work here. And they weren't expecting that, clearly. They were surprised that God is always working with his people, even when we don't deserve it, even if we don't understand it. God's working for us, and he's helping us, and he's providing for us. So they came and called to the gatekeepers of the city and told them the story. The king arose in the night. I'll tell you what they've done. It's a big trick. Go on down, verse 13, one of his servants said, "Let some men take 5 horses which remain. Let's go and see." And so they went and saw, and God's promise was fulfilled. God is always going to take care of his people. He's going to take care of us. But what's the problem? Many times with our freedom, what did these guys do with this freedom that they had now? Took advantage of it, to the detriment of others. That's not how we're to behave. And many times that's what we do with our freedom. Our responsibility to that freedom is one another. That's our responsibility to it. We have to be invested as a soldier. We have to be active duty. I didn't even really stop and talk about that, but active duty. What does that entail if you're on active duty? What's that mean? You're ready. Let's go. I mean, when I was in, one of the jobs that I had was combat ready. I worked with the 1st Tank Battalion, and we had to be combat ready. And I think, if I remember right, I think it was 70% or 75% of my fleet had to be combat ready. When I got there, it was 28%. That was our combat readiness with the Tank Battalion. That's not good. That's not good at all. That's dangerous. And so the year I was there went through quite a transformation of getting that straightened out. It was a lot of work, and it's hard. And that's why I think that military mindset helps us if we can think about that kind of situation, because even in this battle where God's people's about to be overrun. There's how many was out? Are we given a number? That's the number that the angel killed, right? 185,000. I can't remember if there was a number attached to that, but so many times we see God's people being this little bitty group and this massive country or army getting ready to descend on them, and what happens? They can't take them because God's fighting their fight, right? When we come upon things that we can't handle all the time, we just have to know God's working here. God's taking care of this. And brethren, I'll tell you something else. Don and I talk about this all the time, and Jesse, that when a church is going really good, when it's strong and it's growing and it's active, Hope's already nodding her head. What happens, Hope? That's when things start going down. Satan notices this. And if he sees us fighting here, if we're squabbling, silly gossip, talking nonsense about somebody else, or even if it's true, go help them, don't keep throwing rocks. That's what happens. It just starts going down. And Satan's doing everything he can to drive wedges. Everything. He'll attack young couples. He'll attack old couples. He doesn't care who it is. He'll attack the young single man. He'll attack the young teenage girl. He'll attack anybody and everybody. He despises what God is doing through us. Hates it. And we talk about that a lot. Jesse?
I think, the not entangling yourself in the affairs of everyday life, that's a huge point there. There's so much to do in the world,
Yes.
especially in the United States. There's so many things. We got Hollywood down the road. We've got UT Sports.
Yep.
We've got music theater. We've got hockey arenas, football arenas. Anything you possibly. Rome has nothing. Rome
Right.
has nothing. We have the Coliseum.
That's it,
That was
yeah.
distraction enough.
Yeah.
Sports and games. We have so much. And then the television. Right? You just think about the devices we have in front of us.
Now we have a television in our hand, in our pocket.
Yeah. And there's none of it's bad.
Right. But we use it for bad.
Bad.
Yep.
We use bad.
Yep.
But it all entangles us. And what I think what Satan wants more than anything is for you to go, I'm doing nothing wrong. But I'm
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah.
You're busy, so you feel good, you feel accomplished. But what are you busy with?
And what happens many times with the people that are the busiest? Who's going to make the most mistakes? The guy on the sideline of the team or the guy out on the field? The guy on the field is always going to be the one dropping the ball, missing the catch, missing the tackle. I'll do it again this fall. I'll jump up out of my chair and start yelling at the TV because that left tackle missed his pull block, and now my running back is 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage laying there hurting. That just wears me out. So yeah, you're right. That's exactly right. It's the idea of active. We can't entangle ourselves. We can't get so involved because what's it going to do? All this entanglement is going to what? It's going to distract us. And we're going to feel like, oh, I don't have time to go help these people. I don't have the ability to help. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. You can help. You can get involved. You can be active. There's no such thing, as far as I know, in the kingdom of Christ for an inactive list. There's no inactive group in God's people. I mean, I guess when you die, if they kill you, you die. Then you're inactive. So I think that's the only exception to that. Okay, we've got a few minutes here. Has anybody got any other thoughts, comments, questions?
I think, going back to 2 Kings 7, we need more people just willing to say, we're not doing right. There's a day of good news. There's a lot, what are we doing here?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And there's good news to be told.
Right.
And there are people who haven't heard it.
Right.
I think that's the struggle sometimes is because as Christians, we're trying to build our relation with God, we're trying to build our relation with our families, right? And then we have, people in our lives who don't know the good news.
Right.
And sometimes it's just a matter of inviting them to
Right.
talk. Let's talk about the Bible, let's talk about Scripture. But if we're talking about everything else but this,
And again, nothing wrong with everything else.
those things may help you build the relationship so you
Many
can
times.
talk
That's
about it.
exactly right.
I think
That's
there's
exactly right.
time when we say, there's good news to be told.
Absolutely. Great point. Ezekiel chapter 3, real quick, I want to go over here and look at some things that's said here, because this is our responsibility. This is the responsibility of being free people. When you're free, you can't just go and enjoy your freedom all by yourself. You need to share that freedom. And you need to lead others to freedom, right? That's our responsibility. We have been freed by the blood of Christ. And what are we doing with it? Are we just holding it, sitting in our recliner? We're getting ready to, Kathy went out and spent some money. And it's all her fault. But we got some awesome furniture showing up here in a couple weeks. And I'm looking forward to being comfortable in that. But what I can't do is go sit down and never get up to go serve. We need the rest, but we need to be serving in some fashion. Be a little, it can be a lot. We all need to be serving. And look at Ezekiel 3, verse 16. At the end of the 7 days, this is Ezekiel 3:16, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, I have appointed you a watchman to the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, warn them from me. When I say to the wicked, you will surely die, and you do not warn him, you do not speak out to warn the wicked from his wicked way that he may live, that wicked man will die in his sin. But his blood I will require at your hand. That should make us kind of sit up a little bit. God expects us, brethren, he expects us to be busy out saving people, plucking them out of the fire, getting the wicked man out of his sin. Sometimes that wicked man is the guy that's sitting right next to you in church, and you got to go get him. That's our role. That's what we got to do for one another. That's why the idea of entangling ourselves in the affairs of this world, that was impossible while Fred was trying to command his plane and trying to command his mission. He couldn't do that if he was constantly worried about whatever it might have been, right? Can't do it. Jim couldn't have ever been able to focus on working with his men in Vietnam had he had all this stuff going on busy while he was trying to do that. Can't do it. We have to slow the distractions down, quiet the world around us, and let's focus on what God wants us to do. We only have a few years in this world to live. Let's focus on taking what God's blessed us with, the freedom that we enjoy, and use it. Use it. Change lives, help, serve, give. We got to be active. If we're going to be active duty Christians, then we have to act like we're active duty. And I can't sit it as nice as that recliner's going to be. It's a nice lazy boy. Shout out to Ryan Greer. Lazy boy's awesome. I love him. Steve.